in one of my other shurim, I also have a gatekeeper, and he fell asleep this morning. And I realized that my this morning's Daf Yomi class was not taped, and there are some people that actually learn it from the tape, which just means that I'm going to have to learn it again. Okay. There has been there was some suggestion this week of leaving an opportunity. Especially, we had one of the days this week. We ended up schmoozing a little bit afterwards, which was great. And somebody suggested that keeping the shir at exactly the same time that it is. It's a half-hour shir. We finish at 9:30. I try as hard as I can. I try as hard as I can to actually finish by 9:30, but except for yesterday was exception to rule. But that to leave some time for stop at 9:30 and keep the mic open for some minutes. Anybody who wants to stay, they can stay. Anybody who wants to go, they can go. But just gives an opportunity to schmooze and to ask questions not necessarily relevant to the particular things that we're studying. So I think that we're going to try that. We'll try that next week. Of the shir will end at the same time at 9:30, but I'll stay on and give an opportunity if anybody wants to ask questions and for us to be able to learn from other people's questions. Okay. I'm not ready to leave Purim yet, especially because it hasn't happened. My head is still holding in Purim, and but I'm also not ready to ignore this week's Parsha. So I think that there is an interesting intersection between some of the messages of Purim and some aspect of this week's Parsha. There's a glaring thing in this week's Parsha. This week's Parsha deals with the big day kahuna, with the clothes of the high priest. There is a glaring problem at the beginning of the Parsha, which deals with the menorah and with the lighting of the menorah. And we all know that these two parshios are not about the service in the temple; they're about the building of the temple. So why would we be talking about the lighting of the menorah in a section of the Torah that's dealing with the building of the menorah, not with the lighting of the menorah? And why wasn't it in last week's Parsha that dealt with the vessels, and it seems to be portioned into this week's Parsha, which deals with the clothing? Okay, that's for the Shabbos message. That's going to be, you'll get that Mitzvah Hashem on Friday. But in this parsha we deal with the clothes of the high priest, the clothes of the Kohen Gadol, and all of the vestments that he wore. The regular Kohen, the high priest. There's an anomaly in the parsha. Moshe's name doesn't appear, and it's an odd parsha for Moshe's name not to appear in. In the beginning of the Parsha, it says, V'ata Tetzaveh, and you will command, clearly talking to Moshe, but not by name. And our rabbis, our sages tell us that the reason why Moshe's name is not in the Parsha, because in next week's Parsha, when in the aftermath of the golden calf, Moshe says to God, God says he's going to wipe out the Jewish people, and he's going to begin again from Moshe. And Moshe says to God that if that's the case, then Mecheni no misifecha, wipe me out of your book. I don't have anything to do with this. If you're going to wipe out the Jewish people from your anger, then I don't want to be a part of this. Now, the Jewish people did tshuva. Everything was fine. God moved on. But anything that a righteous person says doesn't go for naught. And therefore, the effect of Moshe Rabbeinu's words to God of wipe me out of your book, in other words, wipe me out of the Torah, was that he was out of one parsha. Okay, I understand how that works, but why Parshas Tetzaveh? Of all the Parshas in the Torah, there are many places that Moshe's name could have been taken out of that Parsha. Why Dafka Parshas Tetzaveh? The standard answer that's given by our rabbis is that this Parsha always falls before or after Zayin Adar. Zayin Adar is the day of the death and of the birth of Moshe Rabbeinu, the 7th of Adar. And this Parsha is either just before the 7th of Adar or the Parsha after the 7th of Adar. And in fact, this year it's after the 7th of Adar. But as a as a sort of a commemoration of Moshe Rabbeinu's yahrzeit, a realization that the things you say don't go for naught; they don't just disappear. So then we put it as a testimony to Moshe, as a reminder of Moshe and who Moshe was. We put it in this parsha. The rabbis go further, and there are rabbis that connect this parsha also to Purim, and that understand the different things. It's specifically in Parshas Tetzaveh, because Moshe was supposed to be the Kohen Gadol. He was supposed to be the high priest, and he lost that ability to be the high priest, and that was given over to Aaron. And therefore, in the parsha of the clothes of the high priest, as a sign of respect, really, to Moshe, because Moshe must have been going through tremendous pain when he saw it transferred over to his brother. So therefore, as a sign of respect to him, we leave his name out of that parsha. All of this is true. But what's the message that's being sent to us before Purim in Parshas Tetzaveh by Moshe's yahrzeit to leave his name out of that parsha? To understand that, I want to take a look at a very different kind of Gemara. There is a Gemara in Tractate Chulin, and the Talmud asks the following question. In the middle of a discussion of sending away the mother bird and of different birds, the Gemara asks the question. The Gemara wants to know that Moshe min Torah minayin. Where do I see a reference to Moshe in the Torah? Well, that's a ridiculous question. Where do you see a reference? There's no reference to Moshe in the Torah. Moshe is in every page of the Torah, starting from the beginning of the book of Shmos, going through until the end of Devarim, except, of course, for this week's Parsha. Moshe is in everything in the Torah, and he's even alluded to in this week's Parsha when it says, V'ata Tetzaveh, and you will come in talking to Moshe. So what kind of crazy question is that? And the Talmud answers the question as if it was serious. And it says, oh, the answer to that question is Bishagam hu basar. It chooses a verse in Bereshis, in Genesis, in chapter 6, verse 3, Bishagam hu basar, which is talking after the aftermath of the flood, and God talking about the frailty of the human being, and that a human being is nothing more, after all, than just flesh and blood. And in those words, Bishagam hu basar, it is the same gematria as Moshe's name. Others find an allusion to Moshe's name in the letters of that phrase, B'Shagam Hu Basar. But whatever it is, the Talmud says, this is where you find Moshe in the Torah. As if that wasn't enough, the Talmud then goes on to say, Haman min Torah minayin. Where do we find Haman in the Torah? What do you mean, where do you find Haman in the Torah? If you find Haman in your Torah, you have a falsified copy of the Torah. You're not going to find Haman in the Torah. Haman was a long time after the close of the Torah. What kind of question is that? Haman min Torah minayin. And then again, as if it's a serious question, the Gemara answers from Bereshis, chapter 3, verse 11. And the Gemara says, because it says, Hamin ha'etz, that after Adam ate from the tree, God says to Adam, Hamin ha'etz, from the tree that I told you not to eat from, you ate from that tree? And if you look at the word Hamin, from the tree, and the word Haman, Hey Mem Nun, it's the same letters. We found Haman in the Torah. Well, please do me a favor. What is that saying? And then the Gemara is not done yet. And the Gemara says Esther min Torah minayin. Where do we see Esther in the Torah? Again, you can turn it hafochba, turn it around and turn it around like we learned at the end of chapter 5. The kulaba, because everything's in it, but not Esther. Esther lived after, and the Talmud again answers it seriously. And it says, V'anochi haster aster espanai. God says to the Jewish people in Devarim, chapter 31, verse 18, he says to them that he promises, threatens that in the future, Anochi haster aster espanai, I'm going to hide my face. And nevertheless, you're going to exist in that kind of existence. You're going to find me, and everything is the way it's going to be. But Anochi haster aster espanai, I'm going to hide my face from you on that day. And then the Talmud asks the fourth question, Mordechai min Torah minayin. Where do we find Mordechai in the Torah? Dichsiv, because it says Mor Dror. When it talks about in next week's Parsha, it talks about all of the incense and all of the spices that we use in the daily sacrifice, the daily service in the temple. So one of them is Mor Dror, and it really is speaking of the conglomeration of 11 spices that are put together. The Aramaic translation of the word mar dror is Marya Dachya. And if you say that fast, it's Marya Dachya Mordechai. Wow. That's where you find Mordechai in the Torah. The Aramaic translation of the word mar dror. It reminds me of a Marx Brothers shtick where, he was doing, Harpo was doing charades in order to be able to speak. And he wants to tell them the word surprise. So he shows a soup, and then he shows rice, and they're saying soup, rice, surprise. It's like, come on. Mordechai, of course, he's in the Torah. What in the world is going on here in this section of the Talmud? So I'll tell you like this. The Talmud is not asking, where do we find Mordechai in the Torah, expecting to find Mordechai in the Torah. It's not worried about where Moshe is in the Torah. It knows Moshe is in the Torah. The same with Esther and the same with Haman. But Mordechai, Esther, Haman, and Moshe were such magnificent people. They expressed something so precious and so important. But they didn't do this merely on their own. This wasn't just something that they cooked up on their own. The roots of Mordechai, Esther, and Haman were all in the Torah. It has a place in the Torah. And what the Torah wants to know is, where is the roots? Where is the roots for the dastardly kind of personality that Haman expressed? Where are the roots for the greatness of Mordechai and Esther? And I understand why we have to be talking about Mordechai, Esther, and Haman together, because that's the story of Purim. But what does Moshe have to do with this? Why in a Talmud, in a section of a Talmud that's trying to find the roots of behavior, that where in the Torah do we find these roots? Where did Mordechai find his mandate? Where did Esther find her mandate? Where did Haman find his roots from that would destroy him in such a way? But why do we need to talk about Moshe in this context? So I'll tell you like this. What was Esther's personality? Esther was a person who found herself in a situation where she was ready to give it up. Mordechai tells her that there is a serious problem. They need her help. And she says, no, I can't do this. I haven't been called into the king. It's out of character. It's out of protocol, and I can't do this. And Mordechai says to her, Mi yodeya, who knows if the whole reason why you were put in this position wasn't for this moment. And you have to understand, he says to Esther, that if you don't do this, Revach v'Hatzalah, the salvation is going to come to the Jews mimakaim acher, from another place. Now, Esther could have sent back to Mordechai and said, I hear you, but I can't, there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. And what does she send back to him? Okay, let's get started. I'm ready to go. Esther understood that the hashgacha, the reason why she was placed in this situation, she was willing to open her eyes and to see through the darkness that she was existing. She was in the darkest moment of her life. Do you understand what she was about to lose? She was about to lose everything. Her olam hazeh and her olam haba. Because up until now, she was a rape victim. Up until now, she was at the whim of Achashverosh. She was not committing adultery. She was not committing any crime. She was the victim. But now that she was going to go and she was going to solicit, she was going to bring herself to Achashverosh, all of that was going to change. The Talmud describes that she and Mordechai were married to each other. When the Megillah says, V'hi labas, the Talmud says, don't read it as labas, read it as labayas, that they were married to each other. She would go from Achashverosh, she would go to the mikvah and then go back to her husband. But now she wasn't going to be able to go to her husband anymore, because now she was having relations willingly. The Talmud asks how it was possible for Esther to do this. It says that Esther made herself what's called karka olam. She made herself into like the dust of the earth. She got no pleasure. A righteous person gets no pleasure from a wicked person. But now that she was going to initiate, now everything was going to change. She was going to lose her connection, her eternal connection to Mordechai and to the Jewish people. But mi'adeim leis kazo, she was able to open her eyes in that darkness. And she was able to recognize that I was chosen for this moment. You know, we're always stuck in situations, in crazy situations, and we have to look at those situations and say, why am I experiencing this? Why am I experiencing another person's anger? Why am I experiencing this kind of personal pain? Why am I experiencing this kind of joy? I was chosen for a reason to be in this moment. It all makes sense to me. Where did Esther get that koyach from? In the darkness of her existence, to be able to see through and to see the light. Hine anochi aster es panai. When God says to the Jewish people that you're going to be plunged into darkness, he wasn't saying to them, and that's going to be your excuse to stay distanced from me. He's telling them that's going to be your challenge now, to have to be able to see through that and to be able to see me. And what the Talmud wanted to know is Esther min haTorah minoyin. Where did Esther get that strength from? She got that strength from God himself. He placed that into the world, that we have the ability. Esther was just one who it was publicized that she was able to manifest that. But this exists in every single person. We have the ability to be able, in our darkness, to be able to pierce through and to be able to see the light. And then the Talmud continues and says, Mordechai min haTorah minoyin. Where do we know Mordechai from? What was Mordechai's koach? When Esther said, Lech knos kol Yehudim, Mordechai understood, gathered together all the Jews. He understood that the power of the Jewish people was if we draw together. If we bring ourselves together as one, ki ish echad b'lev echad. And that meant the good guys and the bad guys had to come together. We know that there's a halacha that any tainus, any fast that doesn't have a conglomeration of good people and bad people, in other words, if all of Klal Yisrael doesn't come together, it's not going to be efficacious. It's not going to do its thing. We begin Yom Kippur with the most dramatic statement of the Chazan before he starts Kol Nidre. B'yeshiva shel ma'ala, with the permission of the heavenly court, with the permission of the human court. Give us permission to daven with the avaryonim, with the people that have not risen to the occasion, with the people that have not perfected themselves. Because that's what Klal Yisrael is, and we start with an understanding on Yom Kippur that the congregation of Israel is every single type together. It's not ki ish echad b'lev echad, the good guys. It's ki ish echad b'lev echad, every single Jew. Where did Mordechai understand that? Mordechai understood that he got his mandate to draw everyone together, not to excise and cut out the people that were the cause of this unfortunate circumstance, that the Jews were going to be destroyed and obliterated. He could have easily cut those out. He could have pushed them to the side, but he didn't trivialize them. He brought them in. He got that from the spices. One of the spices is a horrific smelling spice. And when it stands alone, it's horrific. But when it gets mixed in with the other 10, then it becomes the most beautiful conglomeration of smells. And it becomes the keteres, which is a reach nichoach laHashem, which is a beautiful smell to God. Mordechai min HaTorah Minayin, you want to know where Mordechai learned this from? He learned this from Mor Dror. He learned this from the beautiful spices from Moria Dachya. It's not the name of Mordechai that we were looking for. It was the personality, the mandate. It was the life's work of Mordechai. Where do we see those roots in the Torah? And we ask the same thing by Haman. Haman min HaTorah Minayin, and we give the answer from the tree. From the tree that I told you to eat, you ate? What was Haman? Haman was a person that was successful in everything. He had everything he needed. And yet, when one Jew didn't bow down to him, he tells the people around him, V'chol ze einenu shove li. None of this is worth it to me. None of this is worth it. Because I'm missing one thing. What was Haman's downfall? He focused on what he didn't have as opposed to what he had. Where does that come from? That a person has everything and sees nothing? Feels that they have nothing because they're missing one thing? And that we focus on what we don't have rather than focus on all of the amazing things we do have? That comes from Adam. Adam in the Garden of Eden, when God comes to him and says, from the tree I told you not to eat, that's the one you needed to eat from? You had everything. You had kumquats and apples and every single type of pear and peach that is imaginable to the human mind. You had all of that all the time. Not because they were made in some hothouse in Cuba. It's because they're growing here in the garden. They're available to you 24/7, 365 days a year. And I told you, don't eat one verstunkener thing. And you couldn't stay away from that? Because you focused on what you didn't have and not what you had. And that's what Haman represented. That's what Amalek put inside of the Jewish people. And that was why we stood at the precipice of being destroyed and being obliterated from this world. The Talmud wants us to understand that all of who we are, the beauty and the ugliness, it all has roots in the Torah, which means that we can develop the beauty and we can stay away from the ugliness. But where does Moshe fit into this? When Haman made a pur, he made a lottery. He was very excited that the lottery came out in Adar, because Adar was the death month of Moshe. And in Haman's mind, their God, Moshe, died during that month. This couldn't be a good month for them, because he saw Moshe not as a human being, but he saw Moshe as something that was godlike. And that as long as he could disconnect him from the Jewish people, so then they had no connection to those qualities, they could remain a disconnected people, and they would be easily destroyed. What Haman didn't understand is that B'Shagam hu basar, that Moshe Rabbeinu was a Yulud Isha. He was created by a woman. He was a human being. He was mortal. But it was hard for Haman to realize that a human being could make themselves so magnificent. That a human being born as a fugitive, a human being being raised in a foreign palace, a human being having to run away from the place that he was raised, could become and develop himself into such a sensitive, amazing human being. And therefore, in Haman's mind, this was the best thing that ever happened. What Haman didn't realize is that Moshe is not Moshe. And the fact that he died in that month doesn't mean that Moshe's qualities died, because in that same month, Moshe was born. And those qualities were brought into the world. And those qualities were inculcated into the Jewish people. And that ability to rise above everything and become a giant that became available to every human being. That's bishagam hu basar. The Talmud wants to know, where are the roots of Moshe's qualities in the Torah? Not Moshe, but Moshe's qualities. And that's why when we discuss Mordechai, we discuss Esther, we discuss Haman, we have to discuss Moshe also. Because this ability to achieve greatness, this ability to rise above our pettiness and to rise above our Haman-like qualities, all of that comes from Moshe. B'shagam hu basar, just a regular bloke, just a regular fellow who is able to raise himself into greatness and to become something amazing. Maybe that's the reason that right before Purim, we take Moshe's name out of the Torah. Because Moshe's name is so mixed up with all of the things that he does. And we refer to Moshe in this Parsha as Ata, as you, the essence of who you are. Not the stuff you do, not the things you did, but the essence of who you really are. And that's a reminder that in the story of Purim, we meet giants. We meet giants of greatness, and we meet the lowest of the low, and understand that you are b'shagam hu basar. You're a human being, but so are they. You could let yourself disintegrate like Haman, or you can build yourself up incredibly like Mordechai and Esther. But we have the ability to do that. The Shabbos before Purim, around Moshe's yahrzeit, we're reminded that when you think of people that are gone, we think not just of what they did, but we remember who they are. And sometimes we have to downplay what they did so that we can recognize who they are, and to remind us that one of the things that we have to be inspired on and recognize in the story of Purim, that we are enormous. We have incredible kochos. We have incredible power and capability, incredible potential to accomplish great things. All we have to do is to remember that. We have to remember that in the darkness. We have to remember that when we look out at humanity. We have to remember not the downside, but that there is so much incredible beauty that can be accomplished. There is so much that can be done. Purim is not just a day to remember a miracle, but it's a day to remember the incredible potential that every single human being has to reach incredible heights. Esther, she wasn't this new invention. Her roots are in the Torah. Mordechai wasn't this new invention. His roots are in the Torah. So are mine, and so are yours. Okay, it's my thought. Something to chew over. Everybody should have an amazing, beautiful, awesome Shabbos and an incredible Purim. A Purim where we get to touch some of the essential things of Purim and to reach purest levels of simcha, of sasan, and v'yakar. And that in our lives, la Yehuda Ma'isa Oira, some of the divine light should be shed and should illuminate each and every day of our existence. Have a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos and a wonderful Purim. We'll see everybody in Hashem back on Sunday.
Awesome. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
My pleasure. Take care, everyone.
And the same to you.